Welcome to today's discussion. We have herpes viruses for the discussion today. So here we go with the herpes viruses. At the end of the discussion, we would be able to know the general properties of herpes viruses. We would be able to elaborate on the morphology and classification of herpes viruses. We would be able to enlist the herpes viruses causing infections in humans. We would be able to elaborate on the pathogenesis, clinical features, laboratory diagnosis and prophylaxis of herpes viruses which infect humans. Coming to the general properties of herpes viruses, these are a group of viruses. One of the most important characteristics of herpes viruses is that they cause latent or persistent infections in host. These infections later on undergo periodic reactivation. That means after primary infection, the virus remains with the host, and whenever the immunity of the host is suppressed in future, the virus undergoes reactivation and again causes a disease. So now, what is the meaning of latency? So latency. In latency, the virus remains dormant with the host cells. This is a phase in the life cycle of the host. After initial infection, the proliferation or replication of the virus stops, but the viral genome is not completely removed. It remains in lysogeny in the host DNA. Hence, the virus can reactivate, producing large progeny without being reinfected by a new outside virus. So, lysogeny is established when lysogenic cycle is carried out. So, we have a virus with its genome. This genome is inserted in the host cell. There are interactions between the heparan sulfate proteoglycans or the HSPGs of the host cell and between the virus. And so the virus is able to adhere and cause infection to the host cell. So after this adherence, the viral genome is released in the host cell and this genome gets integrated in the host cell chromosome. This is the lysogenic conversion. In the host cell, the genome of the virus gets integrated with the host cell DNA. This is the lysogenic cycle or lysogenic conversion. So this happens in case of latency in herpes viruses. Coming to the morphology of herpes viruses. So herpes virus is an enveloped virus. The envelope is a lipoprotein. The lipid part is derived from the host cell membrane, whereas the protein part is encoded by the virus itself. The protein is in the form of glycoprotein spikes. So these are the spikes all around the envelope of the virus. Then inside the envelope, there is a nucleocapsid, or we can say the other way around, the nucleocapsid is covered by the envelope. The nucleocapsid contains a double-stranded linear DNA. Now, between the nucleocapsid and the envelope, there is a structure which is called as the tegument, which is an amorphous substance. The replication of this virus takes place in the host cell nucleus, and the procedure is same, or the replication cycle is same as that of the other DNA viruses. Coming to the classification of herpes viruses. Herpes viruses belong to family Herpes viridae. This family is further subdivided into or divided into subfamilies. The subfamilies are subfamily alpha, beta and gamma. These subfamilies are further having different genera and species. Now there are 8 herpes viruses which cause infections in the humans. These herpes viruses have their own official names, but we also have common names for them. And for routine use or general purpose, the common names of the herpes viruses are followed.
Start.
So we have human herpes virus 1, human herpes virus 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. Human herpes virus is called as herpes simplex virus type 1 in common name. Human herpes virus 2 is called as herpes simplex virus type 2. Human herpes virus 3 is the varicella zoster virus. Human herpes virus 4 is the Epstein-Barr virus. Human herpes virus 5 is the cytomegalovirus. Human herpes virus 6 and 7 are called as HHV6 and HHV7 itself. And lastly, we have human herpes virus 8, which is called as the Kaposis sarcoma associated herpes virus. Coming to herpes simplex virus, this exclusively infects humans. It spreads very fast and is cytolytic. It causes a spectrum of diseases including the skin, mucosa and various organs. Coming to HSV1. HSV1 can be transmitted through oropharyngeal contact with saliva or direct skin contact. Oropharyngeal contact with infected saliva or direct skin contact is through activities like kissing or hugging. So it can be explained with this example here. So we may have a small child and an adult. So the adult may carry out activities like kissing or hugging a small child. So during these activities there is a close contact with the host or close contact between the patient and a healthy person. The virus enters into the healthy person, starts replicating in the epidermis and causes the infection, and this child can further transmit the infection to many family members and friends. Now this infection leads to asymptomatic infection. Okay, so this infection may sometimes be asymptomatic or it may be symptomatic, causing oral, facial, mucosal lesions. The commonest is pharyngitis. It may also cause gingivostomatitis. This is infection of the mouth and gums. There is swelling in the gums. It may cause ulcerative stomatitis. There are ulcers on the oral mucosa. Then the infection of HSV1 may also cause infections in the nervous system or manifestations in the nervous system like encephalitis, meningitis. Now this meningitis is of special type. This is a recurrent lymphocytic meningitis called as Mollaret's meningitis. There is lymphocytic infiltration. The autonomous system may be involved. There may be transverse myelitis. There may be Guillain-Barré syndrome. There may be peripheral nervous system involvement. There may be cranial nerve involvement like the facial nerve in the Bell's palsy. A person may also suffer with ocular lesions like vesicles on the eyelids, dendritic ulcers, acute keratoconjunctivitis, follicular keratoconjunctivitis, and complications like corneal blindness. HSV1 can also cause cutaneous lesions. This cutaneous lesion is sometimes as a result of latency of HSV1 infections. So this can be explained with the following schematic diagram. So we have the epithelial cells in which there is primary infection of the viruses. The virus enters and primarily infects the epithelial cells. It grows over there. From there it goes to the central nervous system, or it may go to the central nervous system by a retrograde transport. So they travel from these cells and reach the CNS. They remain in latency in the sensory neurons. So here in this case, these viruses are latent in the trigeminal ganglion, and thereafter when there is reactivation of the infection, the virus again comes down by the anterograde transport and again starts multiplying or replicating in the epithelial cells, causing the lesions. Okay, so we'll revise it once more. So we have a primary infection, the virus replicates in the epithelial cells, then through a retrograde transport they go into latency into the trigeminal ganglion, and then again on immunosuppression there is an anterograde transport of the virus again into the epithelial cells, and the virus multiplies, the virus grows, replicates and causes the lesions. So these are the progeny viruses which cause the lesion. So the primary infection can occur in childhood, for example when the child is 3 years old, and the reactivation can be after many years, after a long period of time, maybe even after when the child turns to 16 years old. So in such case there are fever blisters which occur in the host. So these are the blisters, or these are lesions which are triggered when a person is suffering with fever. Fever is generating a stress on the host's body, which is taken as an opportunity to again reactivate and cause infections in the host. So here we have lesions on the lips which are called as fever blisters. Another type of mucocutaneous lesions of herpes simplex virus 1 are herpes gladiatorum. These are mucocutaneous lesions on the body of wrestlers. So wrestlers are in close physical contact with each other, and so one person can transmit the infection to another. Nextly, the virus can also cause eczema herpeticum. It may cause herpetic whitlow. This is a lesion present on the fingers of dentists and the healthcare workers. This can be explained with an example like, if a person with gingivostomatitis approaches a dentist for any dental procedure or a doctor for getting treated, this dentist or doctor comes in contact with the lesions of the infected person, and they may get themselves infected and they may produce something called as herpetic whitlow. These are lesions on the fingers of the dentists and the doctors. Next, coming to herpes simplex virus 2 or HSV2. These are latent in the sacral ganglia. Transmission occurs sexually or through vertical mode, that is from mother to the developing fetus in utero if the mother is infected. HSV2 causes genital lesions. It may also cause disseminated herpes or visceral herpes, which is a viremia, and this mostly occurs in immunocompromised hosts like malnourished people, people with AIDS, pregnant women, and people who have transplants. HSV2 can also cause neonatal herpes. This is a congenital type of herpes transmitted from an infected mother to the developing fetus in utero. So this may result in local lesions like lesions on the skin, eyes and mouth. It may also result in systemic infections like the visceral and or the central nervous system infections. Mortality is high. Next, coming to the lab diagnosis of herpes simplex viruses. So we have a specimen collected. We collect the specimens from the base of the lesion and we stain it with Giemsa stain. This is called as a Zank smear or Zank preparation. We look for the presence of cow-dry type A intranuclear inclusion bodies. After staining, we observe it under the microscope and we look for the presence of very special inclusion bodies which are called as cow-dry type A. Apart from this, we can also look for multinucleated giant cells and we can look for ballooning of the infected cells. The infected cells enlarge. Now, what are these cow-dry type A inclusion bodies? These are eosinophilic or basophilic nuclear inclusions which are composed of nucleic acids and proteins. So, this is the infected cell and these are the cow-dry type A inclusion bodies. What are the multinucleated giant cells? These are masses formed by union of several distinct cells, usually the histiocytes in this case. So we have these infected histiocytes which have multiple nuclei and they have become enlarged. So therefore these are called as multinucleated giant cells. Nextly, we can also go for isolation of the virus. Virus is isolated on cell lines. The human fibroblast cell lines can be used, for example, WI38 or MRC5. Ballooning of the infected cells occur. Then we can also detect the viral antigen by performing immunofluorescence staining methods. So in this we have a slide on which the specimen is smeared. Smear of the specimen is made. The specimen has the virus and the virus has the antigen. So here we have a slide on which we have the antigen and to this we give antibodies which are tagged with a fluorochrome dye. These antibodies tagged with fluorochrome dye are monoclonal and they are available in a commercial kit which is available in the market. So we have to purchase the kit and perform the staining procedure. After performing the staining procedure, we can observe the slide under the fluorescent microscope and presence of fluorescence indicates positive results. So if the virus is present, if the antigen is present in the specimen, we will be able to see fluorescence under the microscope. Next, coming to the DNA detection of the HSV virus. So we can perform methods like the real-time PCR which target the glycoprotein B and the UL30 genes of the virus. Nextly, we can also go for antibody detection. We can detect the antibodies by ELISA and the antigen which is targeted is the glycoprotein G antigens, GG1 and GG2. Against these two antigens, the antibodies are detected in the serum of the patient by ELISA. For prevention, vaccine is not available, but general measures of prevention can be practiced. Like patients with mucocutaneous lesions should be kept on airborne and contact precaution. A person who is having mucocutaneous lesions should avoid close contact with other healthy person. Use of condoms can be practiced to avoid infections by HSV2. And prior administration of acyclovir, which is an antiviral drug, can be practiced or can be done to prevent neonatal herpes if the mother is infected. Next, coming to the varicella-zoster virus. Varicella-zoster virus causes chickenpox. The name of the disease is chickenpox. So the virus enters through the upper respiratory tract, mucosa or through the conjunctiva. So here it is denoted. It replicates in the regional lymph nodes. Then it spills into the bloodstream. This is the primary viremia. It goes to the liver and spleen and then multiplies over there. Then it again spills in the bloodstream. This is the secondary viremia. It infects the mononuclear cells, and these infected mononuclear cells are transported to the skin. In the skin, in the epithelial cells, there is replication of the virus, which results in the disease chickenpox. The virus also goes to the respiratory tract and sheds in the secretions. The virus goes to the neurons and remains in latency in the dorsal root ganglion. So in the skin, as we have seen, it causes chickenpox. So chickenpox is a vesicular rash. It is centripetal in distribution. The face, trunk, flexure surfaces are involved. So this is a picture indicating the centripetal distribution of chickenpox rash. Chickenpox can have certain complications like infection of the skin secondarily with the bacteria or secondary bacterial infection of the lesions, which later on may lead to bacterial sepsis. Then a person may suffer from pneumonia, encephalitis and Ray's syndrome. In Ray's syndrome, if the person is treated with aspirin, the active agent of aspirin is salicylate. When the person is having an intake of this salicylate, there is toxicity in the liver and there is swelling of the brain. This is the Ray's syndrome. There can be reactivation of this virus also. So this can be explained with this diagram. So initially we have a person who is suffering from chickenpox, and through the retrograde transport, the virus remains dormant in the dorsal root ganglion, and again on immunosuppression this virus replicates again and is transported through anterograde transport again to the skin, causing lesions again on the skin. These lesions are now called zoster or shingles. So the reactivation of chickenpox or the reactivation of the varicella zoster virus causes zoster. Zoster is a unilateral rash, and this is confined to the area of the skin supplied by the affected nerves. Zoster can have its own complications like meningoencephalitis, myelitis, cranial nerve palsies, vasculopathy, gastrointestinal ulcers, post-herpetic neuralgia, and something called as the Ramsay-Hunt syndrome. Now, this Ramsay-Hunt syndrome is because the virus is also in latency in the geniculate ganglion, and so on reactivation there is painful red rash with fluid-filled blisters on, in and around the ears. So in this diagram we have these fluid-filled blisters near the ears, and there is facial weakness or paralysis on the same side as the affected ear. So there is paralysis of the facial nerve. This syndrome is collectively called as the Ramsay-Hunt syndrome. Apart from all this virus, the varicella zoster virus, can also cause congenital infections. This is a teratogenic virus. Coming to the laboratory diagnosis of varicella zoster virus, scrapings from the base of the ulcer can be collected. Genes are stained and looked for the multinucleated giant cell. So again here we make a Zank smear and look for the presence of the Zank cell. These are the multinucleated giant cells. Virus can also be isolated. Cell lines are used. These are the human diploid fibroblast cell lines like the MRC5 and the WI38, and diffuse rounding and ballooning of the infected cells is caused. We can also have the virus specific methods like the antigen of the virus can be detected by direct immunofluorescence test, and we can do the PCR for the detection of the specific genes of the virus. Coming to the prophylaxis, A live attenuated vaccine is available. The strain from which the vaccine is prepared is called as the OCA strain, and it is indicated in small children. So children after the age of 1 year are immunized. Immunization is done in 2 doses. The first dose is given at the age of 12 to 15 months and the second dose is given at the age of 4 to 6 years. Nextly, we also have the varicella zoster immunoglobulins. These are immunoglobulins, that means these are ready-made antibodies, and these are given to mother who are suffering from chickenpox to avoid vertical transmission. With this, we finish with the varicella zoster virus. Next, coming to the cytomegalovirus. Cytomegalovirus or CMV is the largest herpes virus. It causes latency in the kidneys and the salivary glands. It causes massive enlargement of the infected cells. And it produces characteristic owl's eye inclusion bodies or owl's eye appearance in human fibroblast cell lines. So these are the infected cells and these are the inclusion bodies. These typically look like owl's eye. Coming to the clinical manifestations of CMV. In immunocompetent host, it may cause mononucleosis-like syndrome as a result of blood transfusion. What is mononucleosis will be explained later on in the Epstein-Barr virus. In immunocompromised host, like people with AIDS, it causes chorioretinitis, gastroenteritis, dementia, and disseminated infections. In people with organ transplant or organ transplant recipients, it causes bilateral interstitial pneumonia, obliterative bronchiolitis in lung transplants, graft atherosclerosis in heart transplant, and rejection of renal allografts. CMV can also cause congenital defects like petechiae, hepatosplenomegaly, and jaundice. Usually, it may also cause microcephaly, cerebral calcifications, intrauterine growth retardation, and prematurity sometimes, and inguinal hernias and chorioretinitis rarely. Coming to the laboratory diagnosis, we can do microscopy. We can look for the owl's eye inclusion bodies in the urine of the infected patient. The virus can be isolated on human fibroblast cell lines, and we look for the owl's eye inclusion bodies in the cell lines. We can look for the multinucleated giant cells and enlargement of the infected host cells. Antibodies can also be detected. ELISA can be done, and antigen used are the matrix phosphoprotein PP150 and PP65, glycoproteins GB and GH, and major DNA binding protein PP52. These are the antigens used, and antibodies against these are raised in the host, and these are detected by ELISA. Both IgM and IgG can be detected separately. IgG, once raised, persists for lifelong. Therefore, detection of IgG indicates a recent or past infection. In this case, we have to do something called as the IgG avidity test. Here, low IgG avidity indicates recent infection. That means infection within 3 weeks. Apart from antibodies, antigen can also be detected. Antigen is present in the peripheral blood leukocytes which are infected. So this specific PP65 antigen is detected, and it is detected by immunofluorescence, the direct immunofluorescence test using specific monoclonal antibodies. We can also have molecular methods. The DNA of the cytomegalovirus can be detected in blood and body fluids like the CSF by PCR methods. The genes which are targeted are those which produce the glycoprotein B, that is the UL55 gene, those which produce DNA polymerase, the UL54 gene, and the PP65, that is the UL83 gene. Coming to the prophylaxis, ganciclovir and valganciclovir are prophylactically given to the transplant recipients. CMV immunoglobulins, ready-made antibodies, can be given to mother to prevent congenital infection if the mother is infected. Next, coming to the Epstein-Barr virus. This infection is common in early childhood and late adolescence. Transmission occurs through intimate and prolonged oral contact, that is salivary contact, during kissing. Blood transfusion or bone marrow transplantation can also cause infections. The virus is infecting the B cells. It also goes into latency in the B cells itself. So there is interaction between the virus and receptors on the B cells. These receptors are the CD21 and CR2. So these receptors are present on the B cells, or they are also present on the pharyngeal epithelial cells. So both these cells can be infected. Primary infection occurs in the oropharynx. The virus replicates in the epithelial cells or surface of the B lymphocytes of the pharynx or salivary glands. Following entry, it directly enters latency without completing the replication cycle. From there, it spreads from the oropharynx to the other sites and undergoes reactivation later on. The virus sheds in the oropharyngeal secretions at low levels. The infection is usually asymptomatic in small children. In young adults, the B cells become immortalized. They start synthesizing large number of variety of immunoglobulins. So there is polyclonal activation of the B cells. These immunoglobulins, antibodies, are autoantibodies. These antibodies are also heterophile antibodies, heterophile to sheep RBC antigen. There is sharing between the antigen of the Epstein-Barr virus and the RBC antigen of the sheep. So the antibodies which are raised in the infected person react against the sheep RBCs also. These are called as the heterophile antigens, heterophile antibodies. Sorry. In response to this, the bystander CD8 T lymphocytes are stimulated and appear atypical. This is called as atypical lymphocytosis. Coming to the clinical manifestations, Epstein-Barr virus causes infectious mononucleosis. This is also called as the kissing disease or the glandular disease. So, a person who is suffering from infectious mononucleosis presents with headache, pharyngitis, cervical lymphadenopathy, hepatosplenomegaly. Generally, there may be fever and malaise. A person who is taking ampicillin treatment also presents with rashes. There are autoantibodies raised and there is atypical lymphocytosis. So what is this atypical lymphocytosis? So these lymphocytes are the WBCs are atypical. They are larger with more cytoplasm. They have nucleolus. Cytoplasm tends to be indented by the surrounding RBCs. The cells are large, so they get indented by the surrounding RBCs. So in this picture, this diagrammatic representation, atypical lymphocytosis can be explained. So these are the abnormal or atypical WBCs. These are large and these get indented by the surrounding RBCs. So these are the RBCs, this is the indented cytoplasm, and these are the atypical WBCs. Coming to other conditions associated with Epstein-Barr virus, apart from infectious mononucleosis, it can also cause lymphoproliferative disorders. This is a set of disorders which is characterized by abnormal proliferation of lymphocytes into monoclonal lymphocytosis. For example, the Duncan syndrome. Then it may also cause hairy cell leukoplakia. This is a wart-like growth of the epithelial cells of the tongue, mostly in the HIV infected people and the transplant recipients. The Epstein-Barr virus is also associated with certain malignancies. The persistent Epstein-Barr virus infection induces malignant transformation of the infected B cells and the epithelial cells. So these B cells and the epithelial cells are transformed into malignant cells. Why? Because there is expression of latent Epstein-Barr virus antigens like the latent membrane protein 1, LMP1, and Epstein-Barr virus nuclear antigen 2, viral EBNA2. So because these antigens are expressed, these cells, epithelial cells and the B cells which are infected, turn to be malignant. Oncogenicity can be controlled by the host immune response by producing anti-LMP antibodies. Hence, oncogenicity is therefore increased in immunosuppressed host. Then what happens in immunocompetent host? In immunocompetent host, the B cell undergoes malignant transformation because of another component, that is the MYC oncogene, another gene. This is a mutated gene which when present, the B cell undergoes malignant transformation or becomes malignant. So now the malignancies associated with Epstein-Barr virus are Burkitt's lymphoma, this is tumor of the jaw, nasopharyngeal carcinoma, Hodgkin's lymphoma and the non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Coming to the laboratory diagnosis of Epstein-Barr virus, we can detect the antibodies. We can detect the heterophile antibodies by the Paul Bunnell test. So this can be explained with the help of this diagram. So for Paul Bunnell test, we need to have the specimen which is serum of the patient. The serum is inactivated. That means it is kept at 56 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes to inactivate the activity of the complement. Then we take a set of tubes in which serial dilution of the specimen is done with normal saline. The serum is diluted in normal saline in a serial gradient. That means 1 in 2, 1 in 4, 1 in 8, 1 in 16, 1 in 32, etc. To this we add equal volumes of 1% sheep RBC suspension. That means we take sheep RBCs and prepare a suspension of 1% and it is added in equal volumes to these set of tubes. That means if the initial serum dilution is done in a volume of 0.5 ml, the 1% sheep RBC suspension is also added in the volume of 0.5 ml. After doing the procedure, we incubate the set of tubes at 37 degrees Celsius for 4 hours. After completion of the incubation period, we look for the results. So positive results are indicated by agglutination. If there is agglutination, we say the test is positive. So agglutination is indicated by formation of a carpet at the bottom. The RBCs are lysed and they settle at the bottom in the form of a carpet. So this is a positive test. In negative test, the intact RBCs settle at the bottom of the tube without agglutination. This is called as a button formation. A titer of more than 256 is considered significant. Then we can also have the monospot test, which is a simple slide agglutination test and in which we are using horse RBCs instead of sheep RBCs. We can also detect the specific antibodies by ELISA and indirect immunofluorescence assays. Antibodies to the viral capsid antigen VCA can be detected. Both IgM and IgG can be detected. Antibodies to early antigens EA can be detected. This indicates current infection, and these are elevated in Burkitt's lymphoma and nasopharyngeal carcinoma. So if in a patient Burkitt's lymphoma or nasopharyngeal carcinoma is suspected, detecting the early antigen by ELISA would be a wise decision. Then we can also detect the antibodies to the Epstein-Barr virus nuclear protein. This indicates past infection, but even though it indicates past infection, a fourfold rise in a paired serum can indicates current infection. The antigen of the Epstein-Barr virus can also be detected. The antigen is detected by direct immunofluorescence test, and it is very useful in malignancies and infectious mononucleosis. We may have molecular tests like the DNA of the virus is detected by PCR. RT-PCR can be used, real-time PCR. The virus can also be isolated. So it can be isolated from saliva, blood or lymphoid tissues. It is isolated on lymphoblastoid cell lines. The virus is immortalized in the cell lines. That means the cell lines grow or the cells grow for a prolonged period of time in vitro. With this, we finish with the discussion of Epstein-Barr virus. Now, coming to the less common herpes viruses, HHV6, HHV7 and human herpes virus 8. So HHV6, in children it causes the sixth disease, also known as the exanthum subitum or roseola infantum, which is characterized by high grade fever and skin rashes, and in older age group it causes mononucleosis like syndrome. Coming to human herpes virus 7, HHV7, it is associated with fever, seizures, respiratory or gastrointestinal signs and pityriasis rosea. Lastly, coming to human herpes virus 8, it is the Kaposis sarcoma associated herpes virus KSHV. In immunocompromised host, it causes Kaposis sarcoma, and in immunocompetent host, it causes fever and rash. With this, we finish with the discussion of herpes viruses. Thank you.